The Yakovlev Yak-38, known by its NATO codename Forger, was a unique Soviet attempt at a vertical takeoff and landing (VTOL) aircraft, serving as both a fighter and a ground attack aircraft. It was developed primarily for the Soviet Navy in the 1960s and 1970s to operate from its relatively small aircraft carriers like the Kiev-class vessels, which were essentially designed as hybrid cruiser carrier platforms. The story of the Yak-38 is one of innovation, compromise, and Cold War strategy, influenced by the technological and operational demands of the Soviet Navy, as well as the need to counterbalance Western naval air power, particularly that of the British Harrier and the American naval aviation fleets. Background and strategic context. The origins of the Yak-38 can be traced back to the 1960s, a period of intense military rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. While the US Navy was developing its fleet of supercarriers and equipping them with powerful aircraft such as the F-14 Tomcat and F-4 Phantom, the Soviet Union faced a strategic challenge in matching this capability. The Soviet Navy, under Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, did not possess the massive supercarrier platforms that were the hallmark of US naval supremacy. Instead, Soviet strategy focused on smaller carriers, essentially guided missile cruisers with aircraft capability known as the Kiev class. Given the restricted size and versatility of these carriers, the Soviet Navy required a lightweight aircraft capable of short or vertical takeoffs and landings, STARVL VTOL. Such an aircraft would need to operate in confined spaces, engage surface and air targets, and provide reconnaissance. This led to the Yakovlev Design Bureau, known for its expertise in lightweight fighters and unconventional aircraft, being tasked with creating a VTOL fighter suitable for these unique operational needs. Development history. The Yakovlev Design Bureau under Alexander Sergeyevich. Yakovlev and later his successor, Sergei Yakovlev, began work on what would become the Yak-38 in the early 1960s. The program was initially codenamed Izdeli-5, and its development followed several experimental stages, starting with a series of testbeds and prototypes. The experimental phase. The precursor to the Yak-38 was the Yakovlev Yak-36, an experimental VTOL aircraft that made its first flight in 1964. The Yak-36 had a basic configuration, featuring 2 lift jets located in the fuselage for vertical takeoff, and a single forward-facing engine for horizontal flight. This configuration provided valuable data on the balance, control, and propulsion challenges inherent in VTOL designs. Although the Yak-36 never entered production, its lessons laid the groundwork for a more operationally capable aircraft. Yak-38 design and technical characteristics. Building on the Yak-36, the Yak-38 featured a more sophisticated arrangement, utilizing a 3-engine configuration. The primary engine, a Tumansky R-27V 300 turbojet, provided thrust for forward flight and was positioned aft in the fuselage, equipped with a swiveling exhaust nozzle to direct thrust downward for vertical takeoff and landing. In addition, the Yak-38 had 2 smaller Rybinsk RD-36-35 lift jets mounted in the forward fuselage behind the cockpit. These lift engines would engage only during takeoff and landing to provide the necessary vertical thrust, and then shut down in horizontal flight to reduce drag and fuel consumption. The Yak-38 had a wingspan of 7.32 meters, 24 feet, a length of 17.3 meters, 56.8 feet, and a maximum takeoff weight of approximately 11 to 300 kilograms, 24,912 pounds. The aircraft's armament included a combination of guided and unguided missiles, rockets, bombs, and a single cannon pod, making it versatile for strike and air defense roles. It could carry up to 1,000 kilograms to 200 pounds of ordnance on its 4 underwing hardpoints, and in some configurations, the aircraft also had provisions for mounting AA-8 AFID or AA-2 ATOL air-to-air missiles for self-defense. Operational limitations. Despite these technical features, the Yak-38 had significant limitations. The aircraft's range and payload were severely restricted by its vertical lift requirements. The lift engines added weight and took up valuable space that could have been used for fuel or additional avionics. The high fuel consumption of the VTOL system also resulted in a limited combat radius, especially when operating from the Kiev-class carriers in open seas. Furthermore, the aircraft's performance in vertical flight mode was highly dependent on atmospheric conditions, with reduced payloads and stability issues in hot or high-altitude environments. Service history and modifications. The Yak-38 entered service in 1976, with full operational capability declared by 1978. It served aboard the Kiev-class carriers, including Kiev, Minsk, Novorossiysk, and Baku. The aircraft's primary roles were naval strike, air defense, and reconnaissance, filling a niche role similar to that of the British Harrier in the Royal Navy. However, the Yak-38 never achieved the same level of operational success or versatility. To address some of its shortcomings, the Yakovlev Design Bureau developed an upgraded variant, the Yak-38M, which entered service in 1983. The Yak-38M featured more powerful engines, R-28V-300 for forward thrust and RD-38 for lift, increased fuel capacity, and improved avionics. These modifications provided marginally better range and payload capabilities, but the aircraft still struggled to meet the performance demands of naval operations. Decline and legacy. The Yak-38 remained in frontline service until the early 1990s, but with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the retirement of the Kiev-class carriers, its role and necessity diminished. The emergence of more capable fixed-wing aircraft and the end of Cold War tensions led to its phase-out. The Yak-38 was officially retired in 1991, replaced in some roles by land-based fighters and naval helicopters. Despite its shortcomings, the Yak-38 represented an important step in Soviet naval aviation. It was the Soviet Union's first operational VTOL aircraft and provided valuable experience in VTOL technology, which influenced later experimental projects like the Yak-141, a more advanced VTOL fighter that featured a variable geometry nozzle similar to the British Harrier. Conclusion. The Yak-38 was a bold experiment in naval aviation, constrained by the technological and doctrinal limitations of its time. While it never achieved the same operational success as Western VTOL counterparts like the Harrier, it served as a symbol of Soviet innovation and determination to maintain a credible naval aviation capability in the face of logistical and strategic constraints. Its development marked a unique chapter in the history of Cold War aviation and paved the way for subsequent, more sophisticated VTOL aircraft designs.